What happened when the undercover CEO of a luxury airline disguised himself as a regular passenger? He uncovered a shocking culture of discrimination, where first-class travelers were treated like royalty while economy passengers were ignored and humiliated. But instead of just taking notes, he took action. From firing toxic employees to promoting those who truly cared, he transformed the company from the inside out. This is the story of how one CEO exposed the truth, demanded accountability, and rebuilt an airline to treat every passenger with respect. Stay tuned. This is leadership like you've never seen before. Jackson Hayes sat in his sleek corner office, staring at the latest batch of customer complaints spread across his desk. As the CEO of SkyVista Airlines, a luxury airline his late father had built from the ground up, he was used to dealing with operational issues. But lately, a troubling pattern had emerged, one that reports and spreadsheets couldn't fully capture. Passengers in economy class were being treated poorly, with some even claiming they were ignored, disrespected, or denied basic services. Complaints of rude flight attendants, dismissive customer service agents, and unfair treatment toward passengers who didn't fit a certain preferred profile had begun to pile up. While first-class guests were lavished with attention, those in economy were often left feeling like an afterthought, or worse, like a nuisance. Jackson had always prided himself on running an airline that offered luxury, but he hadn't realized that luxury had come at the cost of basic human decency. For years, he had trusted his management team to uphold SkyVista's reputation. He had received glowing reports from executives, promising that the company was thriving and that customer service was above industry standards. But if that were true, why were complaints increasing? Why were economy-class passengers treated with bare minimum courtesy, while first-class guests were catered to as if they were royalty? Something wasn't adding up, and Jackson knew there was only one way to find out the truth. He needed to experience it himself. That night, he hatched a plan. He would go undercover as an ordinary traveler, disguising himself as a budget-conscious passenger flying on the cheapest ticket available. He dressed the part, trading his tailored suits for worn-out jeans, scuffed sneakers, and an old hoodie. He even let his beard grow out slightly, ensuring he looked unkempt enough to be judged unfairly. Instead of his usual VIP check-in, he would arrive at the airport as just another traveler, carrying nothing but a beat-up duffel bag. If there was discrimination at his airline, he would see it firsthand. This wasn't about making a scene or exposing one bad employee. It was about uncovering a systemic issue. Jackson knew that if even one flight had these problems, it likely wasn't an isolated incident. He wasn't just going to observe, he was going to fix it. As he finalized his disguise and booked his ticket, one thought lingered in his mind. Would his employees treat him differently if they thought he was just another nobody? Jackson arrived at the bustling SkyVista Airlines terminal, blending into the crowd with his worn-out jeans, faded hoodie, and a tattered duffel bag slung over his shoulder. The polished floors gleamed under the bright lights, and airline employees in crisp uniforms moved efficiently behind their stations. He had walked through this airport countless times before, but always as the CEO, greeted with polite smiles, handshakes, and VIP treatment. Today, he was just another traveler. And from the moment he stepped up to the check-in counter, he felt the shift. The agent at the counter, Tracy, barely glanced at him before turning back to her computer screen. "Name?" she asked, her voice flat, fingers tapping impatiently against the keyboard. Jackson provided his booking details, but instead of the usual warmth he had seen directed at business-class travelers, Tracy sighed and muttered, "Economy ticket, you need to use the self-check-in kiosk." She jabbed a finger toward the machines without further explanation. Jackson noticed the stark contrast when, just moments later, a man in a designer suit approached. Tracy's demeanor transformed, her posture straightened, her tone lifted into polite professionalism. "Good evening, sir. Are you flying first class today?" she asked, her voice dripping with enthusiasm. Jackson moved toward security, already making mental notes. At the TSA checkpoint, things didn't improve. The security officer, Evan, barely looked at the well-dressed passengers but eyed Jackson with suspicion, scanning him up and down. "Step aside," Evan ordered as Jackson placed his bag on the conveyor belt. Unlike the other passengers who were waved through after a quick scan, Jackson's bag was pulled aside for extra screening without explanation. He didn't argue, he wanted to see just how far this bias would go. At the gate area, Jackson noticed a group of economy passengers standing awkwardly near the seating section, while business-class travelers lounged comfortably in priority boarding areas. He approached the counter to ask about a flight delay, but the gate attendant barely acknowledged him, mumbling something vague before turning away. Moments later, a well-dressed businessman asked the same question, and the attendant responded with a warm smile, offering detailed information and even an apology for the delay. Jackson clenched his jaw, the reality setting in. It wasn't just one rude employee, this was a pattern. The treatment of passengers clearly depended on how much they appeared to be worth. If this was happening before he even boarded the flight, how bad would it get in the air? By the time Jackson stepped onto the Sky Vista Airlines plane, he had already seen enough signs of bias to confirm his suspicions. But the real test was about to begin. The moment he crossed the cabin threshold, he was met with a dismissive glance from the head flight attendant, Mark, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a clipped tone and an air of impatience. Jackson moved carefully through the first-class section, where passengers were greeted with warm smiles, glasses of champagne, and offers of personal assistance. Mark and the other flight attendants engaged with them enthusiastically, ensuring they were comfortable. As Jackson entered the cramped economy cabin, however, the tone shifted dramatically. The attendants here moved with indifference, their smiles gone, their words rushed and impersonal. Jackson struggled to fit his small, battered duffel bag into the overhead bin, but before he could adjust it, Mark appeared beside him. "Sir, you need to be seated immediately," he snapped. Before Jackson could explain, Mark grabbed the bag and shoved it into a bin without care, then turned away without another word. Just moments later, Jackson watched as a well-dressed businessman in first class struggled with his designer luggage, but instead of being rushed, 2 flight attendants rushed to assist him, gently guiding his bag into place with reassurances. The double standard couldn't have been clearer. As the flight took off, the disparity in service grew more obvious. When the drink service began, Jackson noticed that first-class passengers received their orders promptly, with attendants smiling and engaging in conversation. But in the economy cabin, requests were met with impatience or ignored altogether. Across the aisle, an elderly woman timidly pressed the call button, looking nervous. After a long wait, a young flight attendant finally appeared, clearly annoyed. "What do you need?" she asked flatly. The woman hesitated before asking for a cup of water, only to be met with an eye roll. "We'll get to it when we can," the flight attendant muttered before walking away. Jackson waited to see if she would return, but 10 minutes passed and no one brought the water. Meanwhile, in first class, passengers were getting 5-star service. A wealthy couple requested custom cocktails that weren't even on the menu, and the staff went out of their way to prepare them. Jackson's stomach churned. It wasn't just about offering luxury to first-class customers, it was the complete neglect of economy passengers that disturbed him. Then came the breaking point. A young mother, clearly exhausted, struggled to calm her crying baby. She looked around desperately, trying to catch the attention of the flight crew. When she finally did, Mark turned to her with a condescending smirk. "Ma'am, if you wanted a peaceful flight, maybe you should have booked first class," he said coldly. The passengers around her shifted uncomfortably, some silently disapproving, but no one speaking up. Jackson's jaw clenched. This wasn't just bad service. This was deliberate mistreatment. As the flight continued, Jackson knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just about one rude flight attendant. It was a deeply rooted culture problem, and he was going to fix it. The tension in the cabin thickened as the flight continued, and Jackson could barely contain his frustration. Every interaction reinforced the toxic culture. First-class passengers were treated like royalty, while economy passengers were dismissed as an inconvenience. But it wasn't until the young mother, still struggling to quiet her crying baby, was humiliated in front of everyone that Jackson decided he couldn't stay silent any longer. After Mark's condescending remark, the mother's face flushed red with embarrassment. She muttered an apology under her breath and tried to soothe her child, but Jackson had seen enough. He turned in his seat to face Mark, keeping his tone measured but firm. "That's how you treat a struggling mother?" Jackson asked, his voice cutting through the murmur of passengers. Mark's eyes narrowed as he crossed his arms. "Sir, I suggest you mind your own business," Mark snapped. "Our priority is ensuring a smooth experience for our paying customers." Jackson scoffed. "She is a paying customer. His words were met with a few nods from nearby passengers who had been watching in discomfort. For the first time, some of them looked ready to back him up. Mark's posture stiffened. "If you have a problem with how we do things, you're welcome to take it up with customer service after we land," he said dismissively. Jackson's next words stopped him cold. "Oh, I will. In fact, I plan on taking it up with Sky Vista's CEO personally." Mark let out a small laugh, shaking his head. "Good luck with that," he sneered. Jackson leaned in slightly. "I don't need luck. I am the CEO." A stunned silence rippled through the surrounding passengers. Mark's smirk faltered, and his eyes widened in disbelief. The flight attendants nearby froze, and a few of them instinctively straightened their postures, realizing that the scruffy economy passenger they had ignored was actually their boss. Mark blinked rapidly, his confidence suddenly replaced with nervous energy. "Wait, you're joking, right?" he stammered. Jackson slowly pulled his business card from his wallet and placed it on the fold-out tray table in front of him. His name, Jackson Hayes, CEO of Sky Vista Airlines, was printed in bold letters. Mark's face was drained of color. Jackson exhaled, surveying the cabin. "Now, let's talk about how my airline really treats people." The next morning, Jackson Hayes walked into Sky Vista Airlines corporate headquarters, no longer in disguise. This time he wore his signature tailored suit, his hair neatly styled, and his presence commanding the same respect it always had. Except today, he wasn't interested in polite greetings or rehearsed smiles. He was here to hold people accountable. As he stepped into the sleek glass building, employees who had once ignored or dismissed him rushed to acknowledge him now. Tracy, the check-in agent who had brushed him off at the airport, suddenly beamed as she greeted him in the lobby. Evan, the security officer who had singled him out for extra screening, nodded quickly before looking away. They all recognized him now. But Jackson didn't return their smiles. Instead, he walked with purpose toward the executive conference room, where his senior leadership team had already gathered. When he entered, the usual polished, confident expressions of his management team faltered. The executives had heard that something had happened on a Sky Vista flight, but they hadn't yet realized the CEO had gone undercover. As Jackson sat at the head of the long glass table, he let the silence stretch, watching their unease grow. Finally he spoke. "I flew on one of our planes yesterday, disguised as a regular passenger in economy class." A few gasps, some exchanged nervous glances, but no one interrupted. "I was ignored by the check-in staff, targeted by security, mistreated by flight attendants, and worst of all, I witnessed our own employees openly discriminate against economy passengers." He placed his hands firmly on the table. "That ends today." A tense silence followed. Some executives shuffled uncomfortably, but Jackson's gaze remained sharp. He leaned forward. "I built this company with my father to provide world-class service, not just for the rich, but for every single passenger who books a ticket with us. If we're failing at that, then we're failing as a company." His voice was calm but firm, and it left no room for argument. He had seen the problem with his own eyes, and now it was time to clean house. The weight of Jackson's words hung in the air, his senior leadership team shifting uncomfortably under his unyielding gaze. He had seen firsthand how his airline treated passengers who weren't paying for luxury, and now it was time for consequences. He turned first to Mark, the head flight attendant who had humiliated the young mother and dismissed economy passengers like they were second-class citizens. "Effective immediately, Mark is fired," Jackson announced, his tone leaving no room for debate. "Blatant discrimination and abuse of authority have no place in this airline." No one objected. Everyone knew there was no defending Mark's behavior. Next, he addressed Tracy, the dismissive check-in agent, and Evan, the security officer who had singled him out. "I believe in second chances," Jackson said, his voice measured, "but only for those willing to change." He paused, letting them sweat. "You'll both undergo mandatory customer service retraining. If I receive one more complaint about either of you, you won't just lose your job, you'll never work in this industry again." The color drained from their faces, but they nodded quickly, realizing this was their only chance to make things right. Then, Jackson's gaze landed on Melissa, the regional operations manager whose job had been to oversee customer service standards at the airline. Tell me, Melissa, how many complaints have we received about poor treatment in economy class over the past year? She hesitated, flipping through her notes. More than we should have, she admitted weakly. And what did you do about them? Jackson pressed. Silence. That's what I thought. He leaned back. You let this culture fester. That means you're either incapable of leading or unwilling to. He let the words settle before delivering his final decision. You're being reassigned. Effective immediately, your responsibilities will be reduced and your replacement will be announced soon. Finally, he turned to Lena, the young flight attendant, who had been one of the only employees to show kindness and integrity on the flight. You spoke up when no one else did, Jackson said. That's the kind of leadership we need. Lena blinked in surprise. Sir, I was just doing what was right. Exactly, Jackson nodded. That's why I'm promoting you. A murmur rippled through the room, but Jackson didn't care. He was making it clear Sky Vesta Airlines was about to change. The toxic culture that had taken root under weak leadership was over, and from this moment forward, accountability wasn't optional, it was mandatory. With accountability set in motion, Jackson knew punishment alone wasn't enough. He had to fix the broken culture at Sky Vista Airlines from the ground up. Policies could be rewritten, but true change had to come from leadership and training. The first major reform was a company-wide customer service retraining program, mandatory for every employee, from gate agents to flight attendants and even senior management. The training focused on equal treatment, conflict resolution, and ethical decision-making, ensuring that economy passengers were treated with the same respect as those in first class. To lead the program, Jackson personally appointed Lena, the young flight attendant who had shown courage and integrity. I want someone in charge who understands what it means to put passengers first, he told her. You proved that on the flight, and I trust you to help rebuild this company's values. Next, Jackson implemented a secret audit system. He recruited undercover evaluators to fly on random Sky Vista routes, documenting how employees treated passengers without the influence of a known authority figure watching. Any reports of mistreatment would result in immediate investigations, and employees who failed to meet the airline's new standards would face disciplinary action or retraining. To empower employees, Jackson also introduced an anonymous reporting system, allowing workers to flag unethical behavior without fear of retaliation. No more looking the other way, he declared. If you see something wrong, you have a voice, and I want you to use it. At the same time, he met with regional managers and senior executives, making it clear that their jobs weren't just about efficiency and profit margins. Numbers matter, but people matter more, he told them. A luxury airline isn't just about leather seats and gourmet meals. It's about how we treat every single passenger who walks onto our planes. The final change was removing harmful policies that encouraged bias. He eliminated unwritten priority treatment rules that subtly encouraged employees to favor wealthy passengers over those in economy. While first-class guests would still enjoy premium services, it was made clear that basic dignity and respect weren't luxuries, they were standard expectations for all passengers. These reforms weren't just for show. Jackson personally scheduled follow-up visits and surprise inspections to ensure that his changes weren't just written in policy manuals, but actively shaping the company's culture. He knew it wouldn't happen overnight, but this was just the beginning. Sky Vista Airlines was on its way to becoming the airline his father had envisioned, one where every passenger, regardless of their ticket class, was treated with fairness and respect. A month after the undercover flight, Jackson Hayes stepped onto another Sky Vista Airlines plane, this time not as a hidden observer, but as the CEO evaluating his airline's progress. Dressed in his usual tailored suit, he blended into the first-class cabin, but this time, his focus wasn't on how he was treated, it was on everyone else. As the flight attendants moved through the cabin, Jackson discreetly observed their interactions. The difference was clear. In economy, a flight attendant patiently helped an elderly man store his carry-on, smiling as she reassured him that he could take his time. At the drink service, passengers in every section were acknowledged with the same level of respect. No dismissive glances, no irritated tones. A young mother traveling alone with a baby received immediate assistance without judgment. The toxic culture he had uncovered was beginning to shift. Lena, now leading the new customer service training program, had sent him weekly reports on progress across the fleet. Complaints about discrimination had dropped significantly, and employees were more engaged in their roles. Even regional managers, once passive, had stepped up to enforce the new standards. Jackson sipped his coffee, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time: pride. He had inherited his father's airline, but for the first time, he felt like he had truly earned his place at the helm. Sky Vista was no longer just a luxury airline for the wealthy. It was becoming an airline for everyone. He glanced around the cabin one last time before pulling out his notebook. There was still work to be done, but one thing was certain: change had taken flight, and there was no turning back. The story of Jackson Hayes and Sky Vista Airlines teaches a powerful lesson about leadership, accountability, and company culture. True leadership isn't about sitting in a corporate office and reading reports. It's about understanding the real experiences of employees and customers. Jackson learned that relying on middle management's filtered updates had blinded him to the truth about how his airline actually operated. By going undercover, he exposed a toxic culture where customer service was dictated by a passenger's perceived worth rather than their right to fair treatment. The lesson? A company's values must be upheld at every level, not just written in policy handbooks, but actively enforced in daily interaction. Jackson's actions also highlight the importance of accountability. Employees like Mark, who abused their authority, had to face consequences, while those who upheld integrity, like Lena, deserved recognition. A business cannot thrive if bad behavior is tolerated and good employees are ignored. Most importantly, change requires action. Jackson didn't just observe the problem, he fixed it. Implementing reforms to ensure fairness became the standard. The lesson is clear. Real leaders don't just manage, they lead by example, ensuring that respect, integrity, and accountability shape their company's future.